Welcome to the latest episode of The Bold Truth About Hungary. As you know, we always say what we mean and we mean what we say. And today's venue, the place itself, is symbolic and as actual as it can ever be, because we are at Tata, one of the headquarters of the Hungarian Army's regiments. And my partner today is the distinguished Minister of Defense for the Hungarian forces, Kristóf Szalai Bobrovnicki. Welcome to the show. Again, this is a symbolic place, and because of the raging war in our neighborhood and the looming economic, financial crisis because of the sanctions, skyrocketing inflation, but most of all, most Hungarians and most Europeans' concern about safety in Europe is our agenda. There's a lot to talk about. Therefore, we decided to narrow it down to maybe 3 major groups of topics and issues we would like to talk about. And the first one is, it all seems to be evident that we have new technology, highly trained new personnel who is going to operate the new hardware. But of course, getting here, and that is being able and capable of coping with the challenges of today, we had to start somewhere. And if we might remind the viewer and listener actually to where we started back in 2010 and the stages by which we got here in 22.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be with you and here in Tata, where I got my first military training actually. So I remember quite well where we started everything from. And we may want to recall the moments when the Berlin Wall fell and we found ourselves with a Soviet doctrine, unpopular mass army equipped with Soviet technology.
Well, we both belong to the generation actually who went through that before entering university, as you rightly say.
And then following that for 2 decades roughly, mainly due to the negligence of the left-wing governments, that army, that heritage of ours has been completely ruined, I dare say. All the equipment has been put aside, sold, and also the personnel, the soldiers, have been reduced in numbers greatly. So much so that in 1999 we joined NATO, and soon after we stopped the conscripted recruitment. Therefore, it has become a completely volunteer army, a professional army, if you like, and the then government forgot to arrange a reservist system around it. So at the moment, given moment in time, we had 17 reservists, and that I think was the deepest point. And then when our government came into power first in 2010, that was the moment when we eventually could turn on the development of our army. At first, we had to put the country in order economically. And then around 2016, we started the whole development program. We might want to talk about it later. I don't want to answer all your questions in the first go.
Very well, but at the same time, we have to mention that when back indeed 6-7 years ago, we started the first talk about first the demise of the army itself, so the critical state of our infrastructure, both in terms of the military bases, the equipment, as you mentioned. We have also seen Hungary's opposition, but also the European left actually attacking any kind of reconsideration if it was about rearmament, if it was about a meaningful, considerable military force in the member states of the European Union. And I recall that it was Prime Minister Orbán actually, back during the presidency of President Trump, who made the first observations and then basically vote to amend what we have inherited, and that is fulfill our obligations if it's about the NATO contribution, and that is the 2% per GDP equivalent contribution to the joint effort. But most importantly, it's not only about the money, but indeed a meaningful army. How is it possible to restart from scratch, as the English says? Because you have to do everything at once. So we are used to technologies and processes when you have step-by-step building up of capabilities, capacities, human and hardware potentials. But we have inherited a situation in which we basically had to, and we still have to do everything at the same time.
Yes, well, the progressive left predicted that the world peace would break out, and therefore no armies are needed, and NATO has become almost obsolete, and the funding of it was a sheer question. And I think a lot has happened since. We have committed to come up to the famous 2% of our budget by next year, and I think this is a great achievement that we are there, and that increase made it possible for us really to start systematically the replacement of the old Soviet-style equipment for modern NATO-compatible high-tech equipment. Much of it, or some pieces of that, are visible behind us. These are the new, mainly from Europe procured equipments. And the good news about them is that much of it, or many of these items, are produced in Hungary, because we put major emphasis on the development of our defense industry. Defense industry is essential, not only because it brings jobs and helps the economy further grow, also because it makes sure that our procurement prices are better and more competitive, but most importantly because of our security, because we do not rely then on foreign suppliers, and our supply chains can be uninterrupted, and we can procure the necessary items, ammunition and other items from our own defense industry. So I think it is a quite well balanced and well planned process in which the Hungarian army's need is identified by military experts, and then we plan the amounts what are needed. We procure from the market, again I say largely relying on European suppliers, and then in the cases where it makes sense for both the supplier and for us, then we incentivize the companies to come to Hungary and invest and build well-working factories from which we then further buy. So that's the model how we work.
Right. Our military rearmament program, let's put it that way, was named after one 17th century famous Hungarian leader of the Hungarian army, Zrínyi. So the Zrínyi plan, which is to finish in 2026, obviously had to be, if not reconsidered, because very obviously we are basically approaching the finalization of the original plan. But many elements had to be put into kind of reconsiderations. As you just referred to, self-reliance, which in the case of Hungary obviously is not Hungarian self-reliance, but European self-reliance is one element of that, but also learning the lessons from what we see around us, basically, very unfortunately, in Europe. Many believe that the war in the neighborhood is only 9 months old, but we all know that it has basically all started back in 2014. With the annexation of the Crimea, which was breaking international law and was introducing a new and novel way of warfare. Do you believe that our program, which is again was focusing between the eruption of the war in the Ukraine, the attack on Ukraine by Russia in February, was able to fulfill itself, and what adjustment is going to be needed? We shall come back to this at the end of the discussion.
Well, I would start with our NATO membership, because that is for our security. As I said, we joined NATO in 1999, and we are a very active and confident and strongly contributing NATO member. And our NATO requirement is to build a heavy brigade by 2028. This we take very seriously, and we invested heavily in that. So the first phase of the development program that you referred to was to buy the heavy iron, which is behind us, which will be the components of that heavy brigade by 2028.
If I may just interrupt, because many of the listeners, viewers I believe together with most of the Hungarians actually, before we started to work on it, that NATO is an existing force itself. And that NATO is going to come at our help if required. But we all know that NATO is nothing but the joint effort of the member states. And that's why we have to talk about the 2% contribution, and also the building up of capabilities and capacities actually according to the partnership agreement and according to the rules actually which are running NATO itself.
Yes, NATO is us really. So we are. That is one of the reasons why we are building a strong national army, because that can be the only contribution. And if other nations do so, as they do, they all build strong national armies, then together we can count on each other. And this is why both NATO and the National Defense Force are so important. So on that framework, we bought the heavy iron and are composing a heavy brigade of that. And that carries on as the items come in, and then the communication in between those items and the whole organization into a working military environment of it is rolling on. But at the same time, we are entering a new phase of the development. Much of it comes from the conclusions of the Russian-Ukrainian war. Because we, of course, as all nations, analyze it very, very closely, what's going on from a military standpoint, and the use of drones, for instance, reconnaissance drones and fighting drones, is a great lesson for everyone. So we are now opening a new phase in our development program, which is the taking on board of the newest technology, and then combine everything together in a strong national army.
As we have announced, and you can see the signs of the discussions about the program back for the past couple of months and years behind us, peace requires force. If you can tell us about the concrete numbers, actually the goals and the achievements so far.
Well, the goals, the real goal is, of course, deterrence, to show enough force, both physical equipment and determination, which means experienced, brave, well-skilled, well-paid, good soldiers combined, shows enough deterrence to any potential opponent who wants to attack Hungary, and with that NATO. So I think that is the goal, and there are a lot of numbers involved in that. Well, we are now, the size of our army is, according to the number that the Parliament approved for us, is 37,500. We are not at that with the actual headcount, but we need to fulfill that, and also at least double the number in the coming years. We have talked about the heavy equipment that is coming in the many tens and hundreds, depends on the items, what the numbers are. We also need to increase the number of our reservists. I'm very much focusing on the special needs and the special abilities and the special flexibility of the reserve force, and the fact that it is quicker to build a big number of reservists than the core professional army. I think it goes without saying, but we are going to focus on both legs of the personal development and then the new technology coming in. So that combined will be our new force, which will have to be then much bigger in numbers and much stronger in equipment.
On the numbers, the figures, the achievements, you are going to see some details in the infographics and charts we are going to provide during our discussion if you follow us on the net. So I wanted to come back as a kind of a closing remarks on the actual lessons of the war in the Ukraine and what happened just in the past couple of days regarding the rocket incident actually in Poland, or the attacks, the destruction of critical infrastructure in Ukraine, and what happened, say, with the Nord Stream as a new and novel element actually of the conflict, which is taking it beyond the two warring parties in Ukraine. What are the exact lessons actually we have to learn? One element we know, and if you can go into detail on that actually, is strategic calm, strategic reservedness, which was very much needed actually during those critical hours when we heard about the two rockets coming to Polish territory. The Poles have been building up probably one of the most formidable armies actually in Europe as we speak. They are also in the midst of a rearmament program. But very definitely these challenges, which are not simply symbolic or abstract, but very concrete on the ground, how can those be answered actually by the member states of NATO, by the member states of the European Union, and how can that be combined into something like a strategic calm and reservedness, which is required when making good decisions if it's about a war?
Well, the brutal aggression of Russia on Ukraine brought a new reality, really, in security and in security planning and everything what we do. And as you know, the viewers certainly have heard that Hungary has been committed to peace all throughout this conflict, and we have been probably the government that emphasized the most and the more frequent the importance of peace talks and eventually coming to peace. Why is that important? Of course, it's important on many, many levels. But the Polish example, an accidental strike of a rocket killing actually innocents, shows that while the conflict is open and armed and ongoing, anything can really happen. And of course, we on the Hungarian defense side do everything possible to protect our citizens and our borders, as I'm sure the Polish friends do also. But such accidental spillovers cannot be really totally excluded. And that, as you very rightly say, in those moments, it was very important that strategic calm takes over in everybody's minds. And we were in very close contact with the NATO leaders and defense ministers throughout Europe, and there were a few hours when no one could know what exactly happened, and that was actually quite tense minutes. But as I could talk to many of my colleagues, and the facts came to light, it was very clear that no one was interested, thanks God, in the escalation of that of the conflict. Therefore, it calmed down, and then the facts which came out proved that this was the right path. Also, you mentioned the Nord Stream event, which was clearly an escalatory step, or the bombing of the bridge, which again was an escalatory step, and there have been many. So I'm still not very calm in that respect, whether the war is about to settle down. It is actually sadly not. The winter may slow things down a little bit, but so far there is no clear military outcome on either side. So I'm afraid it is going to carry on, and a lot more lives will be lost, and therefore there is nothing else other than encouraging peace and calling everybody's attention to the avoidance of potential escalatory steps, but to build a strong national army, which we are doing by the day.
Mr. Minister, thank you. These were very sober sentences about very hot topics. We intend to continue, maybe during the next series in the spring. Until then, please stay tuned with The Bold Truth, but also with my Twitter page and my YouTube channel. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for the invitation.